Ram stood on the corner, bored out of his mind. He was on Astor Street near the Hole, X-rated magazine shop in the Echelons in Haven 15, the red light district. There were male hosts leaned up outside the building looking for Johns, the open sign shining in the dark. Ram moved closer to the shop window as a man walked up to him on the street, covered up in jacket, gloves, hat, medical face mask, long pants, all of his skin covered. The man was shaking. His eyes shined. He had the sickness from the nuclear fallout. "I'll give you 500 credits for a blowjob," said the man. Ram turned towards him. 500 credits? He could eat for a week. Ram had never sold his body on the street, but he hadn't had any food for a week. He was starving. He was cold. His stomach ached. He needed to pee. The offer was tempting. A blowjob wasn't really sex, was it? "What do I gotta do for such a majestic haul?" asked Ram, skeptical, leaning up against the wall, looking away, trying to be coy, hesitant. He brought his hands in his fingerless gloves up to his mouth and blew on the fingertips that were turning blue. It was cold outside, and the fallout levels in the echelons were high today. The air raid siren barking the current danger levels of radiation in the air. Ram spent the money he made on iodine pills and food when he was panhandling, if he had enough. The iodine pills to combat the radiation were always first priority, as well as a place to sleep. But sometimes even those he couldn't afford on some days. He put his hands in his pockets and rocked back and forth on his heels, listening to see what the guy had to say. The man smirked, going into his pocket, shoving a credit card, saying he was good for the 500 price. "And why do you think I would do that? You're lit up. I got enough of my own radiation. I don't need yours," said Ram and took a step away. The man grabbed his arm. 1,000 credits. "I can tell you haven't eaten in a while. Your stomach is growling, and you got dark circles under your eyes from malnutrition. How about 2,000 credits? "What are you not telling me?" Ram asked, a little skeptical. "You want to pay me that much?" Seriously considering the offer now, but he had never done survival sex. "I'll give you 5,000 credits if you let me strip you in the alley around back," the man tightening his grip on Ram's wrist. The offer was too good to be true. A male host walked over to Ram, came up to him, and whispered something in his ear, and then went back to standing by the window. Ram's eyes wide yanked his arm back. "No, I might be starving, but I will not sell my body. That is out of the question," yelled Ram and waved the guy off. "If you had kept with your original deal, I might have considered it. But no go. I got morals." The man walked off down the street, unable to gain his prize. Even hosts that were vaccinated against sexually transmitted diseases required by the government wouldn't mess with that. Ram went over to his host friend that warned him and thanked him for the message. "You look tired. Have you eaten?" said his friend. Ram blew in his hands again and continued talking. "No, I haven't. I've been able to make 700 credits, but I needed it for a bed at a hostel. They threw me out when they found out I was gay. I spent most of it on iodine pills. I didn't want to get radiation sickness." The host went into his pocket and produced a pill bottle, a righteous haul, a whole prescription bottle of iodine pills to combat radiation sickness. Ram had to buy his onesies from dealers in back alleys. The host shook the bottle first and opened it. "Give me your hand," as he poured a bunch of pills into Ram's gloves. He had to put up with so much on the street, with the Johns and the beatings, people chasing him, wanting to take his shoes, finding a place to sleep, being cold, needing to pee, running out of food, out of water, dumpster diving. But he had never done survival sex. And if he could keep it that way, he never would. That was a passage about Rom, the homeless teen who lives on the street, in a short story, Grydscaen, A Storm's Coming, that's in the short story anthology, Grydscaen Legacy, that was published last month. Why do I write about homeless youth? Why do I write specifically about Rom and LGBT homeless youth? The story A Storm's Coming is about Rom, life on the streets for a week, what he has to deal with, and one of the things that we see in the story, and most of the Grydscaen series when we're dealing with Rom, because he's a main character in Grydscaen Dark, we don't talk about his mental health challenges. But in A Storm's Coming, we actually see Rom on the brink of having an episode. So he is showing signs of potentially being schizophrenic. And this is seen in some of his responses to the authority figures, zone police officer Xander Storm, who tries to help him, and just some of his actions on the street. Now, how Rom got to the street, you know, he hacked into Parliament, he was arrested, the government erased his memory and threw him out on the street. He lost his citizenship, he lost his memory, his identity, pretty much everything. And when he woke up, he had no idea who he was, where he was, and what was going on. So, every single day, there's homeless kids on the street. And I talk about this in Grydscaen because it's something that's important to me. But let's talk about some statistics. 40% of homeless youth are LGBT. Half of the homeless population in the United States is under 21. 63% of homeless youth experience violence and sexual assault on the streets. And November is National Homeless Youth Awareness Month. 40% of LGBT youth are homeless. They end up on the street due to family rejection, abuse, addiction, multiple things. Jumping from one foster home, being rejected, many things. Bullying, abuse. LGBT youth are 4 times more likely to be homeless in the UK. 50% of all youth that are LGBT in Toronto, Canada, shelters have mental health challenges. And 1 in 5 transgender people have experienced homelessness. And for many, survival sex is the only way to survive. Grydscaen has a diverse cast of characters. I write about marginalized characters, differently abled, people with mental health, people with different gender identities and sexualities, of minority groups, psychics, whatever, you know, just different things. I write about in Grydscaen and make sure that my stories feature marginalized characters, diverse characters that are often overlooked and swept under the rug. Why do I do that? Because it's important. One of the reasons I write about mental health is to end the stigma. As an intersex trans person with ADHD and autism, and I have a pen, and I can use it, and my pen is my sword. One of my missions is, in whatever little way that I can, with that pen and my stories, to help end the stigma of mental health. And especially with transgender youth and LGBT homeless youth, because every single day there are more youth on the streets. And that's important to me, and that's one of my missions. And so Rom was the very first character that ever existed in Grydscaen. I created him in the 9th grade. and he has always been a homeless youth and a hacker. The short story, A Storm's Coming, published in grydscaen Legacy Anthology, looks at a week in the life of Rom on the streets. His encounter with zone police officer Xander Storm, and what he needs to do to survive. And we see him in the red light district and in the echelons, slums, and just what he has to deal with. And so, being homeless as a youth is one thing, but being homeless and LGBT with mental health challenges is a whole nother universe. And so even things like going to a shelter, well, some shelters are gendered, and so what is a trans youth to do? If your documentation says one thing, you have no documentation, well, if you're a trans woman, they may not let you into a woman's shelter if your documents don't say that. You may get auto-rejected if, a service helps find you a flat or a place to live because, oops, they don't identify or acknowledge the gender in your pronouns. Those are things that actually make it very difficult. A lot of transgender homeless youth specifically, and many times it ends up being trans women, they can't find housing, or jobs won't accept them, or the minute they get clocked and and someone calls them out on it, they may be presenting as female the entire time, but then, one step, one look, you're clocked and you're done. That's it, And, in the United States, things like the Equality Act are very important, and, that makes it very difficult for some LGBT and transgender people to get housing or keep jobs. And so in some of those cases, survival sex is the only way that you're going to make money, and that money can get you a bed, it can get you food. In certain cases, if you're dealing with self-medicating or, other mental illness, and the streets is not something that, anybody would wish on anybody. Nobody wants to live on the streets, ever. But sometimes the streets end up being safer than being in, a family situation of, religious intolerance, or, oops, you won't do that in my house, or you're going straight to hell, so you're out, that, you wake up and you're going to chemistry class, and the next day you're walking the streets, and you've been rejected by your family just because, you came out as gay or trans, and so things like that do happen. Not all families are accepting, and that is definitely something, that is the truth. And, there are things that, society is society, and, like I was saying in one of my previous videos, a trans woman, I think it was either in Puerto Rico or Cuba, just went to the bathroom and literally came out of the bathroom, and she was literally murdered just from coming out of the bathroom. Is that where we are in 2021? Are we really that backwards for someone just trying to be themselves? Nobody should be harmed, hurt, bullied, violenced, or even killed for just being. We need a bigger space, and we need places that are safe. And things like pronouns have power, and pronouns, not using pronouns can kill. So people are like, having your documents have the wrong, gender marker on them can literally cause huge issues, clocking and whatever else. And so things like that end up being dangerous. And so I write about homeless youth, specifically Rom, and even Ian, who is also with Rom on the streets, when the story starts. And that's important to me. And as someone with a pen who writes, I have a voice, and I can use that to speak up for those who can't. Some can't, some won't, some there are repercussions, but my pen is my sword, and I will use it to help. And this is November, National Homeless Youth Awareness Month, and this is also Transgender Awareness Week. And this has been 2021, one of the deadliest years in the United States for transgender people. And I believe just yesterday another transgender woman was killed. And so I will use my pen to speak up for those who can't. And so, yeah, that is what I'm doing. And so thank you for letting me talk about this. Because it is important. And that kid you pass on the street who's acting for some change, they're people. They're a human being. Don't just walk by and ignore them like they don't exist. They're real people with real lives, and that is why I make sure that Rom, and even Ian, and just grydscaen in general, there's Sati Ima and his mental health issues, there's Ian and her dysphoria, Rom and his first signs of schizophrenic episode. Those things are important. And whatever I can do to end the stigma of mental health, I will. And that is why we write. Thank you.